Hi, I'm Max Kaiser. This is the Kaiser Report. I put a hex on you. I put a hex on you. It's all about witches. Stacey Herbert, tell me more.
Max, Romania's witches curse income tax ruling. So because of the financial crisis and the collapse of banking systems and GDPs around the world, Romania's government has started taxing witches and fortune tellers from the 1st of January this year. And because of this, the witches are basically cursing the government. Now, Queen Witch Bratura Buzea is furious about the new law, and she says that she plans to cast a spell using a particularly effective concoction of cat excrement and a dead dog. This is her reasoning for it. We do harm to those who harm us. They want to take the country out of the crisis using us. They should get us out of the crisis because they brought us into it. And I might add, they brought us into it, the global banking cartel, through what could be called just as wacky as using cat excrement and dead dogs that they stuff into a concoction of some sort of securitized product.
Yeah, well, the Goldman Sachs collateralized debt obligation, most of it is cat excrement and dead dogs. This is what they're finding. The Federal Reserve Bank's balance sheet in Washington, the reason why they're afraid to do an audit at the request of Ron Paul is because they know that they've got basically dead beetles, eye of newt, some old chicken bones, some dead cat excrement. That's about all they got at the Federal Reserve because the U.S. is technically bankrupt, insolvent.
So these witches are fighting fire with fire.
Yeah, they're fighting excrement with dog poop.
So you mentioned the collateralized debt obligations backed by the subprime mortgages in the U.S. Here's a headline for you. Foreclosures may be undone by state ruling on mortgage transfer. This sounds like good news, doesn't it? This is the Massachusetts highest court is poised to rule on whether foreclosures in the state should be undone because of the securitization industry practices. At issue is whether a mortgage can be transferred without naming the recipient, which is a common securitization practice, and whether the right to a mortgage follows the promissory note it secures when the note is sold. So a victory for home buyers, for mortgage holders, will mean that many of these banks might have to buy back these mortgages that they foreclosed on.
Right. Of course, that would mean losses for the banks. So what are the banks going to do? Hello, Obama? We need you to change some laws. That's right, Obama. You're our man. Just change the laws because we don't want to suffer any casualties. It's a national security. Change the laws, Obama. And Obama will be like, yes, sir, oh, Bank of America, I'll do whatever you want because the rule of law doesn't exist in the financial industry. No, not in America.
Well, the next headline suggests that this could be true because remember, during the deepest, darkest part of the financial crisis, there was common cause throughout America against the Federal Reserve, whether you're right-wing, left-wing, progressive, unprogressive, red state, blue state, Republican, Democrat. Many people wanted to end the Fed. And what happened with Obama's legislation to repair the financial system? He empowered the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank in Washington. So here's the headline for you, Max. Fed moves to gut predatory lending regulation. So the Federal Reserve is pushing a new mortgage regulation that would effectively eliminate the most powerful federal remedy for predatory lending. This remedy is called rescission, which is used to strike down demonstrably illegal or fraudulent loan contracts and void a bank's ill-gotten gains from such predatory lending practices. Under the Fed's new proposal, however, borrowers will be required to pay off the balance of the loan before the bank loses its right to foreclose. So that means borrowers could still lose their homes even in cases where banks have broken the law.
I mean, they're going to strike down predatory lending laws, right? So they can reopen the predatory lending down there in the ghetto on Wall Street. So that Cleophas Jones, Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan in his big pink furry pimp hat can go up to the ghetto around America and say, I got your predatory loans, y'all, because I'm the pimp daddy, pimp shark. It's disgusting if you think about it that they applied ghetto economics, loan sharking, payday loans, crack dealing is the primary business, and sending out their ghetto gangbangers, the U.S. Pentagon-sponsored military, to go rape and pillage. This is the entire business model supporting these banks.
So that takes me to this next headline, Max. And Obama's new chief of staff, William Daley, J.P. Morgan vice chairman, lobbied against financial reform, foe of health care bill, opposed Consumer Protection Bureau. He apparently was against it when Timothy Geithner called him to basically lobby J.P. Morgan for support of the Consumer Protection Bureau. He said at the time that he believed that there were sufficient consumer safeguards already on the books.
Yeah, well, he's a stone-cold liar. And he's obviously part of the same ghetto economics of getting America into as much debt as possible so that they become indentured servants, answering only to their slave masters on Wall Street who are shilling and slopping and slinging. They're debt slingers, not unlike the crack dealers. But we already know that. What I want to know is, how does Obama get up in the morning and look at himself in the mirror and not cry in embarrassment and shame? As an American myself, I am deeply embarrassed by this idiot who's totally in the service of the bankers.
Well, speaking of bankers, Goldman Sachs may sell Facebook's stake without warning. Well, apparently, they have this deal for private investors to get involved with Facebook. They wrote in the bottom that they might actually be betting against them.
Right. Well, last year, of course, they had to pay a $550 million fine for betting against their own clients. They broke the law. Now, in this case, in the Facebook deal, the securities laws say that if you have more than 500 investors, you need to disclose more about the company to the SEC. But Goldman Sachs said, well, the law doesn't apply to us. The law is for the small people. We don't. If the law is something that it gets in the way of us raping people, we just have you change the law. I mean, they're above the law. Remember, Blankfein said he's doing God's work. So, God doesn't have to obey the law, right?
Another point is made by Simon Johnson, who, in a piece called "Why Are Taxpayers Subsidizing Facebook and the Next Bubble?" He says that Goldman Sachs, remember, it was made by Hank Paulson into a bank holding company. So they're able to borrow from the Fed at 0%, and yet they're engaged, obviously, in very risky investments as if they're a hedge fund.
Well, or exactly, under the Volcker rule, remember, the whole point was to shut down the proprietary trading desk because they were taking huge short-term risks that were underwritten by the U.S. public who had to bail them out. So to bypass that Volcker rule restriction, they've gotten into the pre-IPO market, which doesn't even exist. They invented it on the spot. There's no even regulations that cover it, and they've glommed onto Facebook.
Well, we've been speaking about banks, and I want to go on to this next headline. This is from CNN Money. 2011, year of the bank run. This is a question they're asking because Irish bank deposits declined in November for the fourth straight month, the central bank said just this past week. Overseas deposits fled the country at their fastest pace in more than a year. And so they then asked the question, is a bank run about to bring Europe to its knees? But of course, will we even know? Because it could technically, we might even have to be bleeping out this word bank run here because they're starting to introduce legislation against even mentioning the word bank run.
That's right. You can't say blah, blah, blah. No, you can't say blah, 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 blah. No, you can't say it because it might cause people to be concerned about their deposits. Remember at Northern Rock in the UK, people were concerned because they were involved in predatory lending. They were offering 125% loans on people's homes, which we said at the time was unsustainable. The bank collapsed. There was a huge run, justifiably so. And then you got into this whole period of bailouts and off-balance sheet accounting and the shadow banking system. But yeah, of course, it's very Orwellian, isn't it? You can't tell the people that, hey, your bank's insolvent and you might want to move your money out of that bank, put it into a vault somewhere, own some precious metals or something of value. That in itself becomes, of course, terrorist speech, and you can't even have it. Ultimately, what this means is that when you go to take money out of the ATM, it'll say, well, you can only take out $20 or $30 a day or 20 or 30 euros a day. It'll be basically a collapse, but you won't know it because your money will be rationed to you.
But speaking of money being rationed, it's not real money. People get confused when they think money. It's actually debt. So that brings me to this next headline, Max. Credit cards used to pay mortgage or rent by 2 million people. This is in the United Kingdom. 2 million people, or 6% of the population, is putting their mortgage payment or their rent on their credit card. This is inflationary, of course, because credit card rates are 16% on average in the UK at the moment. Many people, of course, are paying 30%. But this has to be added to these inflation numbers.
That's right. That's right. And, of course, the governments are trying like mad to keep rates from going even higher by buying back their own debts. So they're printing more money to buy back their own debts.
Well, they're doing this to keep money from being expensive for the bankers. So the bankers, like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, will always pay 0%. These people at the bottom who are suffering the inflation will continue to pay 16%, 20%, 80% more every single month, every single quarter for their rent and mortgage.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we also see, inflation and this sovereign debt issue. In the final headline here, Max, Jeff Rubin, peak oil means massive sovereign defaults. So this is Jeff Rubin, and he's a legendary oil analyst apparently, and he says that it takes huge amounts of energy, particularly oil, to achieve the growth rates that all the near bankrupt governments around the world need to even service their debt, let alone repay it. So the minute global industrial production recovered from the recession, oil prices were suddenly on the verge of triple digits. That's not an accident, since the two go hand in hand. Global oil demand is up 2.5 million barrels per day from last year. Any further increases in oil demand and oil prices will be trading comfortably in triple-digit range.
Yeah, so in other words, GDP growth, you need it to re-stimulate the economy to pay off all the debt. But GDP growth is contingent on oil. Oil drives the global economy. Every single part of the global economy is tied to oil. But he also mentions the fact that you've got peak oil. So there's probably not even enough oil in the ground to finance the recovery. So there's just a huge intersection of competing die-offs. Not only are the birds dying and the fish dying and the crabs dying, but the bond market's dying and the credit market's dying and the oil's dying. It's peak oil.
Well, there's not enough oil in the ground at less than $100 per barrel.
Right.
And you need that less than $100 per barrel to continue to grow the economy.
Didn't the Mayans say that 2012 was the big end of time, I believe?
Well, we should ask the Romanian witches.
They would know. All righty. Well, thanks, Stacey Herbert, for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All righty. When I come back, we're going to be talking with Gonzalo Lira in Chile about the economy and what's happening down there, so don't go away.